Welcome to the New Ventures podcast. Our guest for today is Eugene Wang, the founder CEO of Sophie's BioNutrients. Welcome, Eugene.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Sanjoy.
Let's start by talking about you make protein flour out of microalgae in bioreactors. Now, for our audience, what does that mean? Could you help, make sense of those terms by demystifying them?
I like your first question. That is truly a huge mystery for a lot of people already. Just like my father said when he was asking me what I'm doing right now, he said right away, you lost me in the first 2-3 words right there. So I can imagine. So first of all, microalgae. What is microalgae? Microalgae, different than macroalgae. I have to explain a little bit. The macroalgae is something like what we see in the supermarket, the seaweed, the kelp, that kind of sea, ocean growing vegetable. That's macroalgae. So what is microalgae? Microalgae are the tiny microorganisms you have to see under the microscopics. So things like a lot of time you find it in the nutraceutical supplement stores like spirulina, chlorella, euglena. Those are what we call microalgae. So we're growing these microalgae using fermentation tank, or what the more fancier professional term is called bioprocessing. So bioprocessing is describing the way to grow any kind of ingredients, pharmaceutical ingredients, nutraceutical ingredients, or even food ingredients in those fermentation tank like metal vessel. That's called bioprocessing. So basically, we're using fermentation tank instead of the open sunshine pond to grow microalgae. And the purpose of doing this is trying to get alternative protein out of that microalgae. So that basically is what we're doing with our technology at the moment at Sophie's BioNutrients.
That helps, but I do have one follow-up question, which is that, I think many people understand what you said, macroalgae, and that is really nice that you said it. You gave the example of seaweeds and kelp, and many people understand, there are multiple benefits from climate adaptation, mitigation, they protect coasts, and so on and so forth. But what is special about microalgae to produce alternative protein?
So the reason why we chose microalgae, well, initially I chose microalgae because of another very different reason. I have to explain a little bit. Before I came to Singapore, I was in California. I was with another startup, with another venture that I started back in 2010. It's called Sophie's Kitchen. We are the world's first 100% plant-based seafood-themed plant-based seafood company, meaning that we're trying to make plant-based food to replace seafood. So as you can understand, 2010, this is like way before Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat got big and famous. So to a lot of people, what is plant-based food is still very much a mystery. The word plant-based were not even created back then. So I have to go all the lengths to explain to people why the seafood should not be eaten, because the overfishing, because the heavy metal pollution, and so on and so forth. But then at the end of the day, people would ask, well, does your plant-based seafood product have identical nutritional value like the real one? Well, I got that. People are eating seafood because of its healthiness. So that got me thinking. I thought, hey, that's a good point. If you want to try to convince people to make the switch to eat less seafood, we got to come up with something healthier. And that's how I got into this microalgae research. But the more we research, the more we find out this doesn't really have to be just a seafood replacement. It could be a lot more. If you go on to our website or our LinkedIn page, you will see that we are able to use microalgae protein flour, the protein flour we developed from microalgae, to make into a lot of wonderful foods, like the milk replacement. We make a wonderful microalgae-based plant-based milk in the lab, and we also make a cheddar cheese block, cheese spread. We even made a few chicken nuggets and plant-based burger patty. So you can use microalgae protein to do a lot more. And why we think this is really a wonderful solution for the world? Well, first and foremost, these microalgae packed a lot of nutrition. A lot of the microalgae that we're studying, we're using right now, has all the essential amino acids needed by the human being. That's number one. Number two is that most of the microalgae has a lot of vitamin B. These vitamin Bs are so missing in most of the plant-based protein we're promoting in the world today. You can only get these vitamin Bs from some of the animal protein. So that is why these microalgae protein becomes so interesting. And on top of that, growing them is really energy saving and space saving and really sustainable. Let me give you one more example, or a few more examples. One is that our protein can be harvested in under 3 days. Now think about it. Wow, that is really fast. Why? Because think about the cow, the beef. You need about 1.5 years, 540 days. Even growing soy, you're talking about 2 to 3 months, 60 to 90 days. So because we can harvest our protein, think about that, on a per unit production basis, all the water energy we need on a per unit basis level is very, very little. The other thing that's unique about our technology is the space needed to grow our protein. Because we use bioprocessing, we use fermentation tank, you can imagine just like the beer brewery, you can grow a lot of protein in a very tiny space. We did our calculation. Growing a ton of pure protein from our microalgae requires just that 0.02 hectares of space. Now, growing the same amount of protein from beef, you need about 141 hectares of space. Even growing chicken, you're talking about, if I remember correctly, anywhere between 18 to 20 hectares of space. That is how space saving our technology can be. And we all know that in Singapore, space is more than just money. And this is the exact reason why we think this technology can be so sustainable in the fact that it's not only for Singapore, it is also for the whole world into the future when we have so many people, say, for example, by the year 2050.
This is wonderful. And you've already talked about things that I wanted to ask you later. You've talked about your protein flour being used in milk. I know you've also used it in buns for a festival. How do you sort of distribute your product? We talked about manufacturing it, but obviously the other aspect is to get it to customers. Do you use partnerships, or who are your customers?
Right. So we're B2B business model, thanks to the fact that I'm actually pretty fed up with the B2C business model. Thanks to my many years of experiences in California. Quite frankly, the B2C business model doesn't really fit well with our technology, in the sense that, we see this technology as a green technology, as a mission-driven technology. So it doesn't really make sense to make the technology available only to ourselves. So think about that. If we can be the B2B business model, and better yet, if we're open up the technology for licensing or joint venturing, then think about the implication of that, which is pretty much saying that we can then license this type of technology to a big multinational company anywhere in the world. Then they can use the technology and set up a production center right by where they produce a lot of industrial food waste to grow, and then use that industrial food waste to feed and grow our microalgae. Then by doing so, we get to cut down a lot of carbon footprint in terms of shipping, in terms of drying and further processing. And so that way we can really have the production of our microalgae protein flour right by the market or even inside the market. And we can then produce a really minimally processed, minimally footprinted protein flour that can be enjoyed by a lot of people around the world. Now, our business model is B2B, so that means that our customers are not going to be general public or most of the consumers. Our customers are going to be the food manufacturers, who are using protein flour to make their finished products. Our customers can also be the distributors around the world who are selling all kinds of different kind of food ingredients to the food manufacturers or even the F&B operators, restaurants even. Our business model is planning to go to sell our protein flour also to the nutraceutical companies who are already using a lot of protein flour and selling the protein flour in the top as the nutraceutical finished product to the general public. So our business model is pretty clear and also quite flexible in the sense that we're planning to really broaden the appeal and the reach of our product to this B2B business model. So that basically is our plan in terms of customer engagement and the sales strategy.
Very clear, very clear. You have two major challenge funds, right? The Livability Challenge and the Mass Challenge Switzerland. What did these wins do for you? How did it help to build your business?
Should I say prize money or should I say win, actually help us a lot. The first one is definitely the Livability Challenge. That was really the turning point of this microalgae project. As I just tried to explain to you that this microalgae project originally was just a pet project within Sophie's Kitchen, my California B2C business back in the old days. So it was a pet project within that startup. It was not supposed to be a project on a global scale. But then again, coming to Singapore, because everybody was so interested in the new food tech ideas, and so that's why we used the Livability Challenge venue to try to present our technology. And I guess we're lucky enough to be selected as the winner in that event that year, back in 2019. And all of a sudden, this project was elevated to a global stage. And it became so big that was the pivotal year that we decided that the B2C consumer brand unit in California need to be separated with the B2B food tech unit in Singapore. And so that's why we renamed the Singapore unit from Sophie's Kitchen PTE Ltd into Sophie's BioNutrients PTE Ltd, and the two companies were formally separated. And you can see that from that point on, this microalgae protein project or technology becomes of its own, having its own identity and spirit and so. And from that point on, we keep on developing the technology through the pandemic. And just earlier this year, we were invited to get into the Mass Challenge Switzerland Sustainable Food Challenge competition. And then there, again, we won the prize. And that, I would say, is the first time this technology, microalgae protein technology, has the opportunity to really get in touch with the very interested customers that we need to talk to in Europe. This is what we found out in the last few months, especially this from earlier this year, is that when you talk about microalgae technology or microalgae protein, interestingly enough, not a lot of people in Asia have any echo or any response to that. I guess it's because the fact that the novelty of it is just too much that a lot of the people in or professional industry people in Asia are still scratching their head trying to figure out what are we exactly doing. And by the same token applies to North American market is that when we talk about alternative protein from microalgae using fermentation method, a lot of people are trying to figure out what exactly we're trying to do. However, things are very different in Europe. And that all thanks to Mass Challenge Switzerland 2021. We came to the realization that when we talk to a lot of the customers, the future customers here in Europe, when we talk to a lot of corporate partners here in Europe, they seem to understand microalgae technology a lot easier, a lot better than all the other corporate customers, corporate partners that we talk to in Asia or in North America. They sometimes even told us, oh, we studied microalgae 10, 15, or even 20 years ago. I said, wow, you did? That's interesting. And then later, I dig into this issue a little bit deeper. I found out, wow, even European Union back in 2014, just like our Singapore's 30 by 30 strategy, They have this mandate to make microalgae a sustainable food source in the future. So Mass Challenge help us open up another door to get closer and get us into production faster, thanks to the Mass Challenge being able to introduce us to many of these interesting partners and future customers that we can work with here in Europe. So both events are, should I say, the turning points of the corporate development history of Sophie's BioNutrient, of this alternative protein from microalgae technology. And both events, without both events, should I say, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't make the world understand about our technology at all.
Great. This is so wonderful listening to you. Obviously, most of your time today, I guess, is going into Sophie's BioNutrients. But I wanted to take you back a little bit to 2010, which you mentioned, where you set up Sophie's Kitchen and you make plant-based fish products. It'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about those products and how customers have reacted to them.
So I was basically using my family's technology to make a lot of these plant-based seafood products. So I was born and grew up in Taiwan. My family, 4th-generation Buddhism, 3rd-generation making vegetarian food. So in Taiwan, we have this technology using konjac, or what we call Japanese yam in most of the Western market. So that yam has a very special texture once you make it into foods that pretty much resemble the shellfish, especially shrimp. So what we did in Taiwan, my family, we used that ingredient and tried to make it into a shrimp replacement. And that's actually where most of the inspirations of the Sophie's Kitchen product line came from. Our first product is actually a plant-based shrimp using konjac yam. So once we have the plant-based shrimp, from that point on, we develop a lot of different kind of interesting products. Say, for example, we developed the scallop, also using konjac to simulate the scallop texture. We also developed a smoked salmon, using also the konjac yam to simulate that smoked salmon kind of chewy, kind of rubbery texture. And also we use the same konjac yam, we develop calamari, squid rings, so we can even simulate the squid texture. And also using different type of plant-based protein, we develop our fish fillet, fish fingers. We also develop a canned tuna using pea protein. So another thing, which is my personal favorite, I forgot to mention, is our crab cakes. Our crab cakes, the Baltimore, Maryland, American East Coast style crab cakes, which can be used as a burger patty, is actually my personal favorite in the Sophie's Kitchen line. And it is a wonderful combination of konjac yam to simulate the crab meat texture, and also the pea protein to give the whole patty a nice amount of protein portion in the patty. So that crab cake, in my personal opinion, is the most successful product that we launched in the US, and it is also my personal favorite in the US market as well. But to sum it up, I think, Sanjoy, you can possibly see a few things in these product development is that what we're trying to do at Sophie's Kitchen, we're not trying to make a nutritional replacement, or should I say flavoring replacement out of plant-based ingredient to make it a seafood replacement. What we're trying to do is a texture replacement, or the appearance replacement of the seafood, so that especially for the vegans and vegetarians, that they can use in their cooking, that they have something to go with their pasta, with their pizza or their salad, that makes the whole meal taste or feels more or less like the real seafood experience. So that's what we're trying to do at Sophie's Kitchen back in the old days when I was running it.
Well, I did not understand, and maybe it's really interesting to hear that the technology or the recipe, if you may, came from generations from your family. But how do you make plant-based products? What's the manufacturing process like?
So the plant-based fish product manufacturing process-wise is actually not that different than the plant meat product. So it's a lot of meshing, heating, and also combining all different kinds of ingredients to make it happen. So let me start from the ingredient level and walk you through on a very high level, all the way to the finished product. So we once we get the protein flour from the ingredient supplier, we then extrude it using the hot heat and high pressure to physically change the characteristic of the protein flour into a textured crumble, so that once you soak it back with water, it will feel in your mouth pretty much like the meat or fish-like texture, fish meat-like texture. So that's what you have to do as the first step. Now, once you have this texture crumble, you then combine it with other starch, other seasoning, other oil you need, and other type of texture enhancement. Say, for example, some fiber may help your texture as well, to try to simulate the fish texture you want to simulate. And then to make it even more appealing to the American consumers, we then, as the final step, we then add some breading or coating on the surface of the fish fingers or the fish fillet, and then brown it. Went through a quick deep frying process, about 30 seconds. So make the surface look like golden brown, and that will taste and look just like the old-fashioned fish fillet you would have from any restaurant or any frozen meal, or any of the home-cooked fish fillet you would have at home. So that basically is the process how we made those fish, plant-based fish happening in the factory, on the factory floor.
Thank you for that. You have obviously got a long history of building alternate food companies. So in the next few questions, I'll step back and try and understand from you some of the lessons. The first question that I have is that in these businesses, obviously there's a basic R&D, right? Would you just help us understand how long does it take to develop products, and how much of the basic R&D a company like you have to make, or, for example, industry academia collaborations possible, or industry large, startup large company collaborations possible, to sort of short circuit that process a little bit?
Well, Sanjoy, for that, I think we need to define a little bit. In reality, coming up with a product is actually a very quick, very short process, as you can possibly imagine. So if you know a bit about food manufacturing technology, if you know a bit about food science, you can actually easily come up with any kind of product you want to sell in the lab. That should be no-brainer. That should be very easy to understand. Now, that is actually not perfect, because why? You come up with a product randomly in the lab or with your imagination in your kitchen, but is that going to fly in the market? Is that going to be okay with the consumers? You don't know. And so you're going to take some tweak and changes and dig into the issue. Maybe you show your prototype product to your circle of influence, your friends, your family, and trying to make it perfect. And that's still not enough. You then take it to the buyers and then ask them. The buyers could be the retail. If you're making B2C business model, you take it to the retail store, supermarket buyer. Or if you're B2B business model, you take it to your buyers. In this case, that would be possibly food manufacturers, and ask them, is this product something you would be interested in selling or using? Then they will tell you more feedback. They will say, well, this is great, or there's something coming short in your product design. And you see this back and forth tweaking and changing, right? So any kind of product development is actually a very long, arduous process of trying to get the feedback of your finished product user or end user. You have to really come up with a product that people want to use, rather than just the product that you think that they will use, or you think this is perfect for certain demands or certain type of application. That's just not good enough. Today's world, thanks to technology, technology, what I'm talking about technology is I'm talking about the internet, the social media, and all the mobile technology that we have in our hand. Thanks to these technology, information goes really fast. And considering the fast pace of the information changes, if your product development process is not considerate enough, meaning that you did not factor in your end users' feedback, your reputation, your bad reputation will go out pretty fast as well. And so that's the reason why I would strongly advise people who are interested in developing new technology or new products like we do to try to leverage whatever you have in your hand, technology, I mean, or whoever people in your network you can talk to, and try to get a feedback, to get a sense of what your future consumers, future customers will say about the product that you just design, you just develop, because quite frankly, a lot of time, your first idea about the product, 90% of it, people will say it's trash, or this is not right, that is not right. And then you ended up going back to the drawing board and then change this, fix that. And then only when you get a 80%, 90% perfect product, and in this case, by perfect, I mean not perfect to yourself, but perfect to your future customers. Only if you get 90, 80% of your future customers really say that, this is something I like, this is something I want to carry, I want to try to sell, or this is something I want to use. That is the only time when you can say you finish all your product development processes. And you can imagine this whole process we're talking about minimally, depending on what kind of product you're developing, we're talking about 2 to 3 months, or it could be even 2 to 3 years nowadays. But as long as you put your efforts into the development process, include your future customers in the feedback, I think you're on the right track.
Great. I mean, this really solves, at least in my head, a misconception, because I always felt that there is some basic R&D required. But what you're saying is you can get a product out, and the main time that you spend on product development is sort of fine-tuning with the end customer in mind, testing and so on and so forth. So it's more the D part of R&D that is what you should focus on. It's definitely very helpful for me. But then it still leaves the other question that you can develop a product for the customer in mind. And you already referred to the work that you had done in Sophie's kitchen of getting the texture absolutely right so that it tastes like seafood. But still, there is a process of shifting customer attitudes, right? The product has to taste like what the customer is to eat. And, they have to be convinced about the nutritional value, which is what you talked about. So in a B2C segment, what are the processes to get customer acceptance?
Sanjoy, that is a really big question to ask. I hope you understand.
Of course.
Yeah. Shifting consumers' perception, I really have to say, is no easy task. It requires a collective thinking, collective action, and also it requires a lot of, should I say, agreements or consensus among the people you want to try to convince. Let me give you one example. So when I first started Sophie's Kitchen back in 2010, as you can imagine, because I explained to you, the 2 words plant-based were not even created, and Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat just got started, and so no one knew about them. And so in the first couple years of the founding of Sophie's Kitchen, it was really quiet. So quiet that I don't really got a lot of inquiries from internet or at the trade show. And then all of a sudden, in the year 2000, starting from the year 2012, I all of a sudden got a lot of inquiries coming in from everywhere in the world, from Israel, from Europe, from UK, even all the way from Brazil. I was really curious. So I asked a gal from Israel, why are you guys all of a sudden interested in these plant-based products? She then told me that in Israel, this is back in 2013, I remember. She said that there are a few celebrities in Israel trying to promote plant-based diet through the social media. So social media back then is already thriving, trying to promote the idea, the healthiness of the plant-based diet. And because the technology, like I just mentioned to you, the mobile phone is so convenient, people get the information so easily. And so that's when and why there is a collective action that all of a sudden people, especially customers from these Western markets, all of a sudden are interested in the plant-based diet. And then all of a sudden, their opinions, even their behaviors, starting to change. So from this story, you can see that if you want to make such a dramatic shift in the consumer perception or acceptance, it's almost like a paradigm shift. You need a lot of things to happen concurrently, and that is no easy feat. So back to that 2012 or 2013 story is that not only we have the technology on hand to spread the information, you also have all the celebrities lined up willing to endorse and promote that concept. And on top of that, what's even better is that you have all the food technology, food science coming to that point that is ready for all these new technology, new alternative protein technology to be developed, to shine, to really ready. On top of that, you also have the industry, the regulatory bodies willing and ready to be listening to all these changes from the marketplace. You can see that is a wonderful and so difficult recipe to recreate if you want to have another consumer movement like this. And that, my friend, is really no easy task from just what I described to you, But I would really like to see that kind of paradigm shift to happen one more time or a few more times in something else, especially in Asia. I think you possibly can understand in Asia, plastic bag is still flying around everywhere. I was just in Singapore about 2 months ago. I remember I went to Cold Storage, I went to Fair Price. They're still giving out the plastic bags for free. And so sustainability is just not really deep rooted in most of the consumer's mind in most part of Asia. So in order for that to happen, we need a lot of these tiny elements to concurrently to go on. And as you can imagine, that is really not so easy to duplicate. But I'm confident that down the road, if things are happening correctly, we may see again something like the plant-based diet happening in the Western market in between 2013 and up until now to be happening again in different parts of the world with different industry, within different industry or with different kind of a new idea as well.
You're absolutely right. It requires collective action and requires leaders. You used the example of celebrities sort of advocating a plant-based diet, but it requires leaders to come up and advocate that change. But I'm convinced it will happen within our lifetime, pretty quickly in this decade. And, I suppose you saw that The Economist a couple of months back put the alternate food on its cover page. So it really shows the type of deep-rooted customer change that is happening. One thing I wanted to pick up from what you said already is the regulatory barriers. So what type of standards and testing processes or testing infrastructure are coming in place? And more particularly, what should be coming in place?
Well, if you're strictly talking about testing, there's a lot of testing infrastructure already in place throughout the world. So the problem with the regulatory issue is really not with the hardware. It's more with the people, or should I say the combination of the people and the system. Why? Let me give you a few more examples. Is the fact that in the US, when we were promoting the plant-based seafood, or the plant-based meat, you got this fight back from the meat industry, from the seafood industry, saying that we cannot use the animal term to describe our products. So that itself is a failure in our people's mind and in our regulatory system. Why I said that is because think about this other example. Today, we use cloud computing, cloud storage to describe whatever is happening with IoT that we're doing with our computing or with our internet storage, right? So cloud no longer resemble that true water droplets in the sky. No longer is that. Another interesting thing is horsepower. There's no longer horse in your car but we still use the horsepower to describe the power of our engine, right? So my point is just that as the technology evolves, our language evolves as well. So we really should move on with the trend, move on with the technology, with the human evolution. And a lot of time, these regulatory bureaucracy are still binding ourselves to the original place that where we started from and not allowing us to move forward, to progress. And that is, in my opinion, not so smart. Now, another thing with the regulatory issue is definitely the fact with the safety. So you talk about these testing mechanism in place. Well, quite frankly, to begin with, that they are in place because we have all these safety concerns. And so that's why not only they design a lot of these labs to test the safety of these new ingredients, they also set up a lot of traps, a lot of restrictions for these new ingredients to be introduced into the market. Now, I really believe that we should try to quickly remove these barriers, these hurdles, if we want more innovation to come up, especially in the food landscape. Because why? These hurdles are really just stifling the new innovation. Let me give you another example. Is that with our microalgae protein flour here in Europe, the species that we use in our technology is already European Food Safety Authority approved. But because the regulations stipulate that if you do more processing with the ingredients, you then have to file approval with your processes. So that means that because we do fermentation process, never been done before on microalgae, we do protein isolation process, never been done before on microalgae as well. So we then have to file approval process for these two processes. So think about that. That is really arduous, and it kind of hinder the innovation to some extent as well. We have to then spend time hiring expensive lawyers to help us, to guide us through these processes. So I guess the bigger question for the whole world and for a lot of governments around the world is that how can you make these processes more friendly to the new innovation while you are safeguarding the food safety and the promise you have to your citizen, to the consumers. I think in this case, Singapore government really set up a beautiful, wonderful role model. They are the first one to approve the cell-based meat consumption in the world. And I applaud a big kudos for that, because I think they are doing the right thing. They're doing a wonderful, fast, beautiful thing to this new technology. And that's what a lot of the countries around the world should really look at and try to simulate. And Singapore government really could be a wonderful example in this case.
That is absolutely helpful, and it leads very nicely into my last question, which is that you've obviously spent a lot of time in Singapore, and now you're spending time in Netherlands. And you mentioned that the reason you are doing that is because there's more acceptance of your technology there. How has being in Singapore helped you, and what do you look forward to?
So Singapore is, as we all know today, has become the hub, the new hub for a lot of different kind of innovations throughout the world. So should I say it is really the Silicon Valley of Asia? You can't find another place in Asia that has more innovations than we see today in Singapore. So to some extent, I have to credit Singapore for giving me the opportunity to really shine, to really make the whole world know about us. Because you know what? If you ask me to do the same thing at the same time in Silicon Valley, I will be flooded. I will be, muted, because there's so many other innovations coming out of Silicon Valley, coming out of the US. And quite frankly, the kind of microalgae protein innovation would not seem so dramatic anymore. Whereas in Singapore, I guess because, we're a small city state, and we only have about less than 6 million population. So the amount of innovations, be it number one in Asia, is still not quite there yet when compared to Silicon Valley in the US. And so that's why I think Singapore provided us a wonderful platform, first and foremost, to make ourselves known to the whole world. And from that point on, we get to have a say to express why we're better, why we're different than all the other technology out there in the world. And from that point on, we're able to extend our reach to now here in Europe. And from what I can tell you proudly is that in terms of alternative protein, developing alternative protein from microalgae, we're definitely, if we're not number one, we're definitely on the top 3 or at least top 4 spots in the world. And that itself can see that why I think this is a really amazing achievement that we cannot do without being in Singapore for the last 2-3 years.
With that, thank you very much. Eugene, is there any last comment that you would like to say?
Very welcome, Sanjoy. And last few things I would like to say is that I encourage more of your audience try to understand about sustainability issues, try to practice sustainability lifestyle. I believe some of your audience are possibly what I call the influencers, the opinion leaders. They are just like the celebrity that I mentioned in my stories about Israel. These influencers, these opinion leaders, you guys really need to speak out. You guys really need to influence your circle of influence, your friends and family around you, your followers around you. Try to convince them to make a commitment to a more sustainable lifestyle. Because quite frankly, sustainability is not a slogan. Sustainability really have to be a lifestyle in order to make a paradigm shift to save our planet, to make our future more livable, more nutrient dense, and more glorious for our future generations to come. So I really encourage your audience to try to do that. And if there's anything I can help, I think you can reach Sanjoy to get in touch with me. I'm very glad and very willing to share, answer any question with your audience anytime. So thank you all. Looking forward to more communication in the future.
And that is so inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjoy.